Hi everybody, my name is Bhavishya, and in this lecture we will forward with the previous concept. What we were learning is our firewall. So far what we have seen here is that we were discussing about the rules, right? The priority of it, that when we check the rules, we check it from top to bottom. So the very first rule should be in a way that it doesn't hinder all our rules. Like we have example here where PC1 is trying to connect to server and the protocol is any and the action is allowed. So as the rule number first says allow, the connection between PC1 and server will get completed, right? And our rule number 1 and rule number 3 will get aborted or ignored. What they were telling us. Then if PC1 tries to SSH with our server, then deny. And also with the, I guess both of them are same. This might be a 23 telnet, right? So if this happens, then deny. So as this is the dominant one, as it holds the top priority, all else will be neglected. Right. Now, what we were doing is till here that we were making rules. Let's suppose we made three rules, and then we applied all the rules to the intended interface. Right. But this particular is very tedious. It is very tough when we look at the whole topology in a larger framework. So instead of that, what we do is now we'll make a policy. Okay, so let's suppose in that policy I have n number of rules, and then I'll apply the single policy to an intended interface. Let's suppose here, right? This is a better option. Now, before forwarding to policy for making one, let's understand a concept which is implicit and explicit rule. So implicit, as the name suggests, implied, right? Which is this must be done, right? It's not should, it's must, that this must be done. So these are the rules which are intended, right? These are applied, implied. This is known as our implicit rules. The second rules are explicit. The explicit rules are the rules which says that if I tell you to do this, then only do that. Unless don't do it. Like that. So let's suppose let me pull out a policy. So let's make a policy. Name of the policy is, let's suppose, my policy, right? So in the policy, my rule number first says that, okay, I'll explain you and then I'll write it, which is if PC1 tries to connect to my server, the protocol is TCP and the port is 23, that is my telnet, then action is deny. So we are denying the communication happening between PC1 and server with the help of telnet. Now the rule number second says if PC1 tries to communicate with our server with the help of SSH, then allow. And the third rule, or the nth rule, I would say, which is known as our implicit rule, that it is implied, the must one, it says that if my source IP is any, it could be any PC1, PC2, PC3, any. If my source IP is any and my destination is any, it can be anything. Server, PC, PC3, PC2, then action is denied. So this is my implicit rule, right? Or you can say hidden rule. So let me write it down. So the last one, nth, because we can have n number of rules, right? So the last one is our rule nth, which is known as implicit rule or hidden rule, right? Which denies any type of action happening between any source IP or any destination IP. Right. Now I'm applying this my policy on this interface where MAC address is C. Okay. So now let's suppose our PC1 wants to communicate to server with the help of telnet. What will happen? The very first thing that we'll do is we'll check rule number one. So rule number one says if PC1 tries to communicate with our server, the protocol is TCP and the port is 23. 23 is my telnet, and this is what we are trying to do. Then deny. So the communication between PC1 and server is going to get denied. Now let's suppose second scenario where PC1 wants to communicate to server with the help of SSH, which is my port number 22. So in that case, when my policy is applied on this interface, MAC address C, we'll check the rule number first. Rule number one said if telnet is happening, then deny, but we are doing SSH, right? So we'll go and check rule number two, which says if PC1 try to communicate to server with the help of SSH, then allow. So it will match and the communication between PC1 and server is going to happen successfully. Now let's suppose we have third type of condition where my PC2 wants to communicate to server with the help of SSH. So what will happen? We'll check the first rule, which is if PC1 tries to communicate to server with the help of telnet, then deny. But my source IP is 192.168.10.2 and the source IP here in the very first rule is 10.1. So we'll go to the second rule. Here also it says that if PC1 tries to communicate to server with the help of my telnet, with the help of my SSH, then allow. But here as you can see, my source IP here in this condition is 10.2, right? So we'll head to next rule, which is our hidden rule, which says if source IP is any and destination IP is any, action is denied. As you can see, both of them, both of the rules got failed, and this is the only one we have, the hidden rule, and our source IP is any, because in this case this is considered as any and my destination address is also any. Action is denied. So the communication between my PC2 and server is going to get denied. So by virtue of this policy, what we intended to did here was that we make the policy in a way that it is bare minimum. The communication is allowed bare minimum and the rest communication is restricted. As you can see, when PC2 tried to communicate to the server, it got denied due to our implicit rule, right, or hidden rule. So when we make policy, we can make multiple type of things. We can make blacklist type of policy. Let's suppose instead of my source IP as 192.168.10.1 or PC1, I would have gave it a range that if this particular network is source IP or this particular subnet is source IP, then action is denied, right? I can blacklist a particular network or a blacklist, or I can blacklist a particular subnet, right? Now let's suppose there is a case where there are multiple PCs, right? Let me pull out. Now, in the case where I have multiple PCs here, and my policy is I'm changing the policy a bit. Where my source IP is 10.1, still PC1. My destination IP is still my server. But in place of protocol, we have TCP. My protocol is TCP, but the port number here is, let's suppose instead of 23, instead of telnet, now it is my HTTPS, which is my port number 443, right? So the action is to be allowed instead of deny. And the rule number 2 says it can, okay, let me change it a bit. The action will be my deny, and also my tip is going to be this, and source is going to be any. Suppose. Right. source any, dep any, an action is going to be. So protocol is going to be also beneficial for us. Yeah. Now in this case, what will happen that it will only allow our connection with server when the website is secure, right? When it is following the port 443 or secured website. Else it will deny all type of protocols, right? As the protocol is any, an action is denied. As the source is any also, right? And let's suppose if I interchange rule number 2 in place of rule number 1, then what will happen? No connection will happen, right? So this was it for this lecture. I hope you enjoyed and I hope you learned about firewalls. See you in the next one.